Now let's look at the component depreciation and how do we practically apply the concept. Suppose you have an asset. You have an asset. In our example, let's think about aircraft. It has numerous components, but some of them are significant components from an asset. There may be a lot of components. However, some of them would be significant components. Suppose component 1, component 2, component 3, component 4, component 5. And these are others, which means when we add them up, that will come the total assets of the firm. So what we did here is we broke down the asset into various components, component 1, 2, component 5, and all those items within the asset that do not form part of the component, we mention it as other, suppose component, CN. Now the first question should be how did we break down into different component? So standard says under IAS 16 the componentization should be done based on the of the component cost of the component in relation to the total cost of the asset. Total cost of the asset. Suppose the total cost of the asset is $1 million and the cost of the component 1 is suppose $200,000, which means component 1 consists of 20% 20% of the total cost of the aircraft, which means it is deemed to be a significant component. Let me tell you one of the important thing that you should know. There is no such threshold or percentage given in IFRS. IFRS is totally based on judgments from the management. It's quite judgmental standard. It do not have any rule that 20% should be significant, 10% should be significant. It specifies that if it is significant based on the cost of that particular component in relation to the total cost of the asset, then let's make it and call it to be a significant component. The similar principles is applicable for all of them. And these are basically the sorry, these are basically the residual category, which means they are not able to get allocated among any of the component, which means that we need to do some treatment for them as well. Now, after you determine the component, you need to determine the useful life of each of the components. Suppose component 1's useful life is 5 years. Component 2's useful life is 10 years. Component 3's useful life is 2 years. Component 4's useful life is 5 years. And component 5's useful life is suppose 20 years. From component 1 till component 5 we are fine. Now what about component which which are not able to get allocated among any of the significant components? From here we will choose a leader. From here we will choose a leader. We will choose a component within the other category that majorly covers the entire other components. For example, if the component includes spares, parts, lubricants, and everything, and suppose one of the spare contains 70% of the total cost of the other components which are not able to get allocated, then in such a case we will assume that the spares represent the entire population and we will choose it as a leader, and we will depreciate the entire other components based on the useful life of spares. Suppose the useful life of spares is 30 years. 30 years. So what we did, we determined the useful life of the components, each of the components, based on the allocation made. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna club those components which do have similar useful life. C1 has C4, C2 do not have anything, C3 do not have anything, C5 do not have anything. C4, sorry, C5, C4 is already clubbed under C1. C5 do not have anything, and other component do not have anything. Now what we can do is we're gonna depreciate C1 and C3 together for C1 and C4 together for 5 years, C2 for 10 years, C3 for 2 years. This is already clubbed under C1, C5 for 20 years, and other component for 30 years. So the total cost that is being allocated among each other, among each of the component, we will add C1 and C4 because we are depreciating it together, and we will depreciate and will compute the depreciation expense accordingly. And when we sum up the entire depreciation expense, that is the total depreciation of the asset, which means assets is broken down into component. We computed the depreciation of the component, add all of the depreciation expense of the component to arrive at the total depreciation of the asset. Now, this is a practical view of how we do component depreciation. I understand that involves a lot of judgment within this because the identification of components, the determination of the useful life, and the determination of the leader among the other component itself is a critical judgment that the management need to assess.